Hello, my name's Steve Ringer and welcome to Feeder Fishing. Right, I've brought you here today to Larford Lakes. We're going to be fishing the Speci Lake, but we're not going to be fishing for the big carp. We're going to be fishing for skimmers. The reason being, this time of year, yes, carp can win the matches, but a great fish to target are the skimmers. They're like anything from sort of 12 ounces to £3 in here, and they're great weight builders. So a typical match might be maybe an hour trying to catch a carp, 3 hours trying to catch skimmers, and then the last hour trying to catch carp. But it's the skimmers I'm going to concentrate on today, just to see what's possible. But also, it's all about bites at this time of year. So skimmers are more reliable, carp tend to be shoaled up, whereas there's a few skimmers to be caught everywhere. So probably going to fish sort of 2 lines, alternate the 2, fish them very differently just to try and work out what's best. I've also got the Golden Rod Final coming up sort of 3rd week of March, so it's going to be a nice opportunity. While I think carp will win that, there might be areas where skimmers can play a real part as in building a weight. So I'm going to be able to get a feel for that too. So I'm killing 2 birds with 1 stone. So before we start fishing, let's move on to the bait. Okay, on the bait front, let's first talk about ground bait. It is freezing cold today. I've actually picked a slightly milder day, but just lately, last week this lake had ice on it, water temperature's really low, so I want a mix with a relatively low food content. So what I've done first of all, I've mixed this last night to make it nice and inert. I've done a pint and a quarter of Ringer's natural bag-up mix and the new FEEDER sweet fish meal. The sweet fish meal, as it suggests, very sweet mix, but quite fine. So I've mixed it the night before, slightly over wet it, then given it sort of a couple of hours to dry out and then just tweaked it. As you can see there, it's nice, light and fluffy. The only thing I'd say is it's still got quite a bit of food in it. And it's also very light in colour. The water today, it's not crystal clear because this is a commercial and there's a lot of fish, but it's clear compared to what I'd normally expect. So rather than using it neat like that, which I'll probably catch a few fish, I think I can enhance it by adding some lean, and I can also enhance it by darkening it off. So basically I've got a bag of black lean, just normal sort of terre de somme, and what that'll do is it reduce the food content of the mix, and it's also going to give it a better colour. So if I just trim off, a few people have asked me since the Barston EMAG about obviously mixing lean into ground bait. It's always best to mix it separately. There it is. So what in there, I've got a pint and a quarter of FEEDER, pint and a quarter of natural bag-up mix. I'm going to go a third, basically, of the dark lean. But rather than just tipping it straight in, out the bag, it's quite lumpy. It just needs thinning out. So I'm just going to measure it out into a pint tub, like so. That's my pint and a quarter, quite rough and ready with the measures. Just going to drop it through the riddle. Just take any lumps out of it. I'm not going to, anything that's stuck on the top, obviously I'll throw away. Like there's a few big lumps. I just want to make it nice and fine. It's already quite damp in the bag. Sometimes when you buy lean, you might notice it's quite dry. If it is, once I've passed it through the riddle and you think, oh, it's a bit dry, just use an atomizer to wet it up. But this, as you can see, it's already quite nice and damp. So it's gone through a riddle, as you can see, lovely and fine. All I'm going to do then, tip it into my ground bait. Take the drill so you can lose sound for a couple of seconds. And there we go. Basically totally changed the colour of the mix. Nice and dark, but it's not black. I'm not a massive fan of like a really black mix because I feel visually it doesn't offer any attraction. But by adding sort of a third of black lean, I've just took the edge off the colour and I've got a nice sort of almost chocolatey coloured mix, which is not going to spook any fish, but it's still visually got attraction. Now the reason I don't add the lean in to the dry ground bait is if you try mixing lean, like basically by adding a lot of water to the ground bait with a dry lean, it just turns into stodge, basically. So even now, if I want to tweak this mix, and I've got the atomizer with me to do it, I don't want to be pouring in like half a pint of water and trying to mix it round, because before you know it, you'll have a load of concrete in your bucket, which is good for nothing. So that's still quite nice at the minute. It's nice and fluffy, going to cloud, but if I do want to tweak it, use the atomizer, just purely because lean's brilliant, but if you over wet it, it can literally turn into stodge and you can't get it back again like ground bait because it doesn't dry out. So that's the ground bait. Loose item wise, I've got dead maggots, dead pinkies. Just great baits. I prefer them dead, nice and inert. I'm not going to feed a lot of bait today. I think we are going to catch a few fish. Well, I'm hoping we're going to catch some fish, but I don't think they're going to want a lot of food. So dead maggots, dead pinkies, more for hook baits and loose feed. So I should be putting a few of them in and at the same time using them as hook baits. Got a few pellets. Again, I don't intend on feeding loads of them, but the fish in here, particularly the bigger bream, I think it's their staple diet. So they're used to eating pellets. So all I've done is got a few fishery pellets, wetted them down, and like they're nice and soft and spongy. Just the fish are used to them, and I just don't think they do any harm. Lastly, we've got worms. Obviously got a load of worms in the tub, and I've chopped some worms up nice and fine. As you know, I always harp on about this if you're a regular watcher of the mag, but I'm never sure about worms. They can be brilliant or they can be really bad. Or the only thing I've got to go on here is I did a coaching session here about 6 weeks ago, and we kicked off. It was a pole feature, so a bit different, but we kicked off and didn't feed any worms and we couldn't catch a fish. It was really rock hard. Put a little ball of ground bait in with a few worms in, and it was brilliant. The more worms we fed, the better. So I'm thinking today they are going to want some worms, but I'm going to hedge my bets a little bit. And like, I'll only put them in, I'm going to fish 2 lines, but I'm only going to put worms in on 1 line at the start. So that's the bait. Not pretty simple. You know what I mean? All right, there's a lot of bait as in different maggots, pinkies, but not a lot in terms of cost. So feeding wise, all I'm going to do, I want a feeding mix and then sort of like a fishing mix. So I'm going to take 2 pints of the ground bait and lean mix out. This is basically my feeding mix. Because what I'm going to do, I've got 2 lines. What I found on commercial, particularly this one, to catch the bigger bream, it's different to a natural venue. The bigger bream live closer to the bank. So I'm going to fish a line at, I'm going to feed a line at 14 metres, and I'm also going to fish a line at 25 metres. Now this whole session is totally dependent on, for me, the short line. Short line's where I expect to do the damage. So I'm going to put some bait in on the short line, let it settle, maybe hour, hour and a half, maybe even 2 hours if I can get some bites at 25 metres, and then drop short where I'd expect to have a good run of fish. So that short line is really, really important. And I think the reason the bigger bream live there, it's where the bait goes. You know, I mean, a lot of the matches here, they fish the pole. So a lot of bait goes in on that sort of 13, 14 metre line. So the bream are used to feeding there. So what I've done is I've got a baiting up rod that's clipped up at 14, and then I'm going to fish at 15 with a little cage just past it. But I'll talk to you about that when we deal with setup. So took 2 pints of mix, put them in there. This is my feeding mix. And I've got a little 100ml pot. And to that, I'm literally going to add not a lot of bait at all. So you've got 25ml of pinkies. Just drop them in. Same with dead maggots. It's roughly like a quarter of the pot full. So not a lot of bait. And then the same with pellets. I'm not going to put any worms in there to start with, because yes, I do think they're going to be good, but I'm not 100% on that. And if I plough loads of worms in on that short line and it's wrong, then I've killed it and I've ruined my best line. So I should put some worms in at the start on my long line and my 25 metre line. And if they respond, then I know I'm away. But if they don't, I've not harmed that short line. So that's the mix I'm going to use as feeding. Like I said, not a lot in it at all. Literally like 50ml, well 75ml of bait in total. No worms. So not a lot of food, but quite a lot of attraction. And I mean, the idea being, I'm going to put 10 feeders in on the short line of the big guru baiting nut feeder. And then I'm just literally going to start fishing on the long line. So that's the plan. Let's see how it goes. Okay, as I said, I'm going to fish 2 lines. 1 line I'm going to attack because that's going to be my main line. But I'm going to attack it and hopefully then leave it to settle. On that line, I'm just going to put 10 of them in. I mean, it sounds a lot, but when you look at it, as I've shown you, there's not a lot of bait in it. But I want to put enough bait in to sort of hold a few fish. So when I do drop on it, they're nice and confident and I'm going to be able to pick them off. But sort of rather than fishing directly on the bait, this is clipped up at 14 metres and then my fishing rod's clipped up at 15. Because what I found on commercials is, and naturals to be fair, you can put a bed of bait in and the fish like to sit off the back of it. So by fishing at 15 metres, I can fish off the back of it. If I'm getting loads and loads of line bites, which would be lovely but doubtful, I'll just come back to 14. But normally you can find, particularly when it's hard, I can put a volume of bait in without harming the swim because I'm always fishing just past it. And quite often those fish will just sit on the back of it because they want to come and feed on it, but conditions aren't quite right, it's a bit cold or whatever. So that's the theory. So all I'm going to do, plug it nice and loose. It's about 9 foot deep at 14 metres. It's always quite hard to chuck that short. Just want to be nice and a nice smooth lob, letting the feeder hit the bottom. Just hit then. One other thing I will mention is I'm staggering both lines. What I don't want is like my line on my longer line running straight through the short line, because if you're getting, liners are great, I like to get liners, but I don't want to be getting liners on the short line when I'm fishing the long line, because it could spook them. So I'm fishing the short line, I'm lining up in a little gap in the trees to the left, and then the long line will literally be as a single tree to the right. So when I'm fishing the long line will be running slightly to the left of where I've baited the short line. So that's one. Like I say, I'm going to let them hit bottom because it's a nice cloudy mix anyway. Just nice and smooth on the cast. Not looking to be on a sixpence. You know, in bream and skimmers on any venue, you can't catch them on like a tiny little area. So I'm looking basically to feed maybe an area over sort of like 1.5 metres. So they've got a bit of room to sort of graze. And I'll try and be a little bit more accurate on the long line, purely for the fact I'm not feeding as much bait. I say if it was shallower, I'd consider maybe like trying to cloud it up higher, so maybe emptying one out high up in the water on the surface. But today I'm quite happy to let it get right down. What I like about these feeders as well for baiting up is that they're slightly tapered, so the thick end's at the bottom, so they empty really quick, and it's natural for the bait to want to come out. What I don't want to be doing is sort of dragging bait 3-4 metres back from this area. Although I want to spread it a little bit, I don't want it literally all over the place. And the shape of these, you can actually feel the feeder empty really fast. And because they're plastic as well, they come to the top nice and quick. I think that's 4 I've put in so far. Now, it might seem sort of quite time consuming to do this, but to me it's time well spent. Because I do expect this line, if everything goes to plan, is where I'm going to be catching the bulk of my fish in the sort of second half of the session. You know, something I will mention as well while we're doing this, obviously I've got the 2 lines, 25 metres and 15 metres. On the real short line I'm using mono, and on the 25 metre line I'm using braid, purely for the fact I don't believe you need braid to fish 15 metres. The bites here from the bream are normally pretty good, so I don't need it for bite detection. You know, accuracy, well, if you can't cast accurately to sort of 15 metres, then I shouldn't be here. So I just don't need it, and I just think less chance of a hook pull. If I get a particularly savage bite, or even hook a carp, there's a chance I could hook a carp doing this, then I've got a much higher chance of landing in it if I pick up on mono. So that's the reason I've got mono on one and then 010 tournament Evo braid on the other. Like I say, for 25 metres I think braid's brilliant, but for this short I could fish with it, but I don't need it. Losing count now, I think that's 7, so 3 more. And roughly that like 10 feeders is going to be about a pint and 3/4 of ground bait. I reckon I'm going to have about maybe a pint and a half. I'm going to have about half a pint left, I think. So if you think about it, it's really not a lot of bait. And there's very little food in it either. So the interesting part's going to be when I start fishing longer to see if there's any, see how quickly the fish come to worms, or if they don't come to them or do. That's number 9, so 1 more. Yeah, I'm going to be left with half a pint. So it's roughly half a pint of bait with 75 ml of loose offerings in it. 1 more. Not plugging it too tight, sort of nice and soft. You can see odd pinky and dead maggot sticking out of it. I mean, if I was going to go straight on it, obviously I would never be putting this amount of bait in, because because I want to be able to catch on it. This way, all I'm doing is setting it up. That's the last one. So the trap's set, so to speak. We're going to put that down and switch over to the long line, the 25 metre line, where I'm literally going to be fishing for a bite. Setup wise, you might notice doing things slightly different. Obviously I've got the O10 braid I've already mentioned, 2.5 metre shot leader, 10 pound tournament ST, nice and robust. I always prefer fishing with a shot leader for skimmers. Roach is a bit different, but I've set it up a little bit different. If you can just see that there, I've got it running. Basically what I've done is I've threaded on the smallest size Guru line stop, then a little, I never know the name of these, but like they're a little swivel which allows you to quick change your hook length. That's a size 16, little Drennan one. And then I've got another line stop below it. And if you can see, then I've just got, what, 1.5 to 2 inch twizzled loop with a snap link on it, which obviously attaches your feeder. So it's paternoster style. What I like about this setup, if I get the hook out of the bait bowl, it doesn't tangle. I mean, it's nothing worse, particularly in winter, like maybe I might be leaving it out 15 minutes, reeling in, and you've got a tangle. Because it's helicopter style, like so, just spins. The secret is make sure you've got a little gap between the stops. If you have them too tight, you will get a few tangles. The other thing I like about it, if the main line does break, it's not free running, so it wouldn't be SIPS friendly. I couldn't use it in the World Champs. But if the main line did break, that stop can pull off, and I'm not leaving the fish tethered. So it's a paternoster rig, but it's a nice, safe way of fishing it. And also, say I want to chop and change hook sizes, it's just literally a case pushing the, it's covered in ground bait, but if you can see it, of pushing the silicone down on the swivel, clipping the loop in, clipping it back on. So I don't have to cut hook lengths off to change. I mean, which like, it's always, if you want to change bait, say I wanted to put like a herring worm on or even a bigger hook for a big bait, rather than having to cut the hook length off, as can be the case with the rig I've been fishing with. With this rig, just clip the hook length off, put a new one on, one chuck. If it doesn't work, I can go back to the old one. So it just allows me to fish a bit more efficiently. So when it's closed, it just looks like that with the hook length in. On the subject of hook lengths, just got 50 centimetres, 012 pure fluorocarbon. I'm loving fluorocarbon for feeder at the minute. It's stiffer, it sinks, I think you get less tangles with it. To me, there's nothing not to like about it. So 50 centimetres, nice starting length. Might come a bit shorter. If I can get indications and start catching a few fish, then I'll look to come shorter with a shorter hook length. Equally, if I'm struggling, I might even look to put like a 65 or 70 centimetre on. So feeder choice, I'll talk to you about in more detail once we start fishing. Hook choice, size 16 Guru F1 pellet. Obviously the name says pellet, but it's a nice wide gape pattern, razor sharp. It just lends itself to a multitude of hook baits. Like I'm going to start today on 3 dead red pinkies. It's just been a really good bait for me for skimmers over the years. Always try and pick the reddest ones, just a personal preference thing. But if you ever see me like picking up a bunch and then throwing some away, it's just the ones that take my fancy. So I'm going to start on the 25 metre line. I'm just going to wet my braid. That's an important, when you are braid fishing, one of the biggest cause of tangles is casting out at the start of the session with dry braid. So I've wet the braid up, nice and wet, so it's not going to tangle, you're not going to get any sort of wind knots. As you can see, got a bit of a blob of worm, 4 or 5 dead pinkies. All I'm going to do, got the watch, famous stopwatch. I'm going to have 4 or 5 minute chucks to start with, just to put a bit of bait down, just to see if I get a quick response. Rather than sort of putting like 2 or 3 feeders in or fish. I want to fish it reasonably positive, but at the same time, give myself a chance of putting a bit of bait down and maybe catching a few fish off this line. I think one of the problems, particularly in like silverfish matches or when you're targeting silvers on venues like this, is writing off. I don't want to write off the first hour, hour and a half. Everything's about that short line, as I've already said, but I want to give myself a chance of catching like 3 or 4 fish in the first hour and a half. And because those 3 or 4 fish at the end of the day, if everyone catches the same on their short line, they're the difference between maybe framing or coming nowhere. So rather than writing it off and catching nothing, I want to fish a little bit positive. What I wanted to do was fish close enough in, because I do think the bream and skimmers live close on it, particularly on this venue. So there's no point. I see people chucking out 40, 50 metres, but you never catch anything out there to get the lines well apart. Whereas this way, by staggering them, I mean, I think personally 10 metres is far enough apart, but 25 metres is also close enough to give myself a chance of catching a few bream early. And then when I drop on that short line, I should just be able to push things on. So that's my thinking. Let's see how it goes. Well, I had one 5-minute chuck. Second chuck, I've just chucked it out and it's only been out, I reckon, 6 seconds. And I've either foul hooked a bream or I've got a carp. My gut instinct is if it's a bream, it's massive, so it's a carp. I mean, like I say, it has warmed up a little bit. It is cold today, but it has warmed up. And there was always the chance of hooking a carp. Just shows you though, on the right sort of line, whether I can keep this on or not, I'm not convinced. Obviously it's on the braid as well, which isn't ideal. I do wonder whether I've foul hooked it. For how quick the bite was. Or it might just be, there's a lot of big carp in this lake. But I think it justifies like that 25 metre line. There's not a lot of mileage here in going out sort of 50 metres. I just don't think enough bait goes out there. So I'm not saying there's not fish out there, but they're not used to feeding out there. So a much nicer sort of line to catch the bream and the carp is that 25 metre line, whereby in the summer probably a lot of hard pellets go there. It's just an area they expect to find bait. This is going to take some serious getting out. You never know though, while it's still on. It's going to be further away than when I hooked it in a minute. Could be foul, it's so hard to tell. This is a good, I'm on peg 14, so for those who know the Speci know this is a good area for carp. Hopefully I'm not going to get them, I'm on the clip now. What I will do is if I need to, I'll just take the clip off. I've got my sticks set up behind me. So worst case scenario, and this keeps running, which it looks like it might, I'll literally just flick the clip off and just go back and re-stick it back to the 25. That's the beauty of lighting. I always leave my sticks set up purely for that, just so fast. If you do hook a fish like this, like I'm going to have to do, I think, am I? I've got my finger on the clip now. Yeah, clip's off. I always say on commercials as well, even when it's really cold, the best chance of catching a carp is always straight away. So it's hard to say whether it's in the mouth. Just literally, the feeder's at bottom. As I'm tightening up, it's like that. Picked up and you just felt too big to be a bream. Like I said, I've not come to catch carp, I've come to catch bream and skimmers, but if a carp comes a lot, I'd like to get it out. Problem with this lake is they're normally big, a lot of double figure fish. It's not really coming in very fast. Problem is on 012, there's not really a lot I can do with it. How it's running now, I'm thinking maybe I fouled it. Because it's definitely woken up. Like normally, obviously, on my carp gear, I'll be able to clamp down on it, but it's just a question of trying to stay attached to it at the minute. Oh, there's another clip. Sometimes when it's cold, they come in nice and easy, but this one hasn't read that script. Problem is, the further out it gets, the less chance I always think I've got of getting it back. In case you're wondering on the rod choice, all the 4 rods I've got, they're all 11-foot Tournament Pro quivers. Nice soft action, which is probably the only reason I'm still attached to this. Ounce tips. I think it could be a comeback after the break job, because this is, I can't believe it stayed nice and still at the start. If I'm not careful, it'll be under the far bank. Oh, it's gone. It's gone a long way before it came off as well. I don't know if it's broke me or just pulled off, but as you can see by how much I'm reeling in, problem is when it gets so far out, you get a lot of drag. Let's have a look. I think it might have, no. Oh look, telltale sign. I think I would have had a chance if I'd hooked it in the mouth. I'd have had a chance of landing it, but I didn't. So, right, let's get back sticked up and go back to some skimmer fishing. Well, we're 30 minutes in, so I'm basically on my 6th, just chucked for the 6th time. Obviously that carp came along and basically trashed me second cast. I don't think that's done it any favours because, as you know, it was fouled and it's ran like left, right, all over the place. So any skimmers that were out there probably got scattered a bit. But I'm still fishing the 5-minute chucks. I'm on my 6th cast. I just had a little liner, which I don't think was a carp. It's like a lovely slow inch pull, so maybe there's a skimmer or two starting to mill around. Like I said, obviously hooking the carp there was always a good chance I was going to hook one, especially first cast before they realise what's sort of going on, and then they'll back away. But I don't think it did me any favours, and obviously foul hooking it made it sort of worse, but it's just one of them things. There's nothing I can sort of do about that. All it did was sort of enforce the fact maybe I'm happy with the line, 25 metres was a good line, and I do think I will catch a couple of fish on it. I'm not worried I've not caught after 30 minutes. You know what I mean? It's bream and skimmer fishing. I'd have been surprised if I'd have cast out and had like 6 in 6 casts, because that just doesn't happen. As I said, it's all about that shorter line. So if I could nick, we're 30 minutes in, so if I could have 1 or 2 after an hour, I'd be happy with that. But even if I hadn't caught after an hour, it's still not the end of the world, because bream and skimmer fishing, it's about when they turn up sort of making the most of it, and I'm confident they will feed. But I just wanted to find a line whereby I could catch a couple of fish early, rather than sort of right in the... Because a lot of time in silverfish matches, you write the first hour off because you don't want to fish your main line, because you spook the fish by catching them too early. So what I wanted to do was find a line a bit closer in than most fish, at that 25 metres, where I could get a start in the first hour. But as I said, I'm not sure that carp's helped, but we'll see where we are. Hopefully, now I've had a sign, I'll catch a fish in not too distant future. I'm still putting little blobber worms, 2 or 3 dead maggots or 2 or 3 red pinkies through. I'll do that for probably, if I haven't caught, for 45 minutes. Then if I haven't still had a fish, I'll just cut the worms out. As I said, I'm never sure about worms at this time of year, and the water temperature, I don't think it can get any lower than what it is now. So if nothing happens, I'll just take the worms out and just fish neat ground bait with a few pinkies in. Just do that for sort of 15, 20 minutes and just see what happens. But hopefully the next update will be with a fish. If not, we'll talk on the hour mark. There we go. 7th chuck in. So literally I've been fishing 35 minutes. Tiny little bite. I'm on braid and I'm fishing it really slack. It's just sort of sat there and just knocked 2 or 3 times. I'm still on a bunch of pinkies, 3 red pinkies, picked up. And what I'm pretty sure is the first skimmer of the day's on. Though it's not a big fish by Larford standards, but I think it's £1 plus. Shot leader's just gone through the rings. It's £1. At least I'm off the mark. There we go. Tiny little bite, which I think A, merits me the fact I'm using braid, and B, just says how cold the water is. To be fair, it proper wanted the bait. Probably just about £1, I'd have said. There we go, hooks out. Go. Nice skimmer, quite small, but as I said, I'd expect the bigger fish to show on that really short line, but at least I'm off the mark. It's also a sign, oh, just throwing that disgorger on the floor, that worms are pretty good. Well, that fish certainly came to them anyway, so I'm happy to keep putting them in. And it means when I go on my short line, if I've got 2 or 3 fish in the net on worms, I can start putting them through the feeder, confident that they're what the fish want to eat, they're coming to them. And I'm not going to kill the swim. So 3, I'll just show you that. 3 red pinkies. Don't know why, just over the years, red pinkies for skimmers, fantastic bait. A lot of people tend to use fluoros, but I've never done that well with fluoros. I always think fluoros look nice to the angler, but don't necessarily catch a lot of skimmers. That bite was pretty quick as well. My stopwatch is only at 3 minutes now, so probably like it's only been out a minute. It's quite common in winter because I think, contrary to popular belief, the skimmers are off bottom, so I'm dragging them down. That's why not really a fan of trying to bore them on on a venue like this, which is sort of 8 to 10 foot deep, and just leave it out there until one finds it. Unless it's desperate and I'm only fishing for one, I'd rather keep chucking not much food in the mix with the lean, get a bit of cloud there, try and pull a fish down. I think sometimes in winter it's too easy to try and wait for it to happen, whereas by casting regular with a small feeder I can sort of try and make a bite or two. And like I said, I do think they're off bottom, and it's all about trying to get one to go down and feed, or get 2 or 3 to go down and feed. So fingers crossed. Oh, I thought I had a little, hang on. Definitely had a little indication then, just as I was tightening up. Tiny little indication, which probably with mono you wouldn't even see. I thought it was going to go. Oh, it's moving again. Is it on? Yeah, it's on. That nearly pulled the rod in the end. Just shows you when they turn up. Again, it's not a big fish. A few turn up at the same time. Very strange. Tiny little, like, probably 2 tiny little, don't know, not even 1/4 inch indications. And then all of a sudden it's proper pulled round, which I think it was either Mark said, when you're bream and skimmer fishing, sit on your hands. And I'm a big believer in that. Wait for like a continuous movement or a proper pull. Because what I don't want to be doing is sort of striking at liners and maybe unsettling fish. This way, by sort of waiting, that's why I use the butt rest as well. Wait for a proper pull, pick up, and you know the fish is on. You know, a lost fish in the swim wouldn't do it a lot of good either, or just bumping one with a feeder as you're coming past it. A little bit bigger perhaps. Yeah, £1.25, £1.5. But I'm starting to get to the stage where I'm getting that sort of fast start. And as long as the short line doesn't let me down. There you go, £1.25, £1.5, a bit bigger than the last one. Let's see if we can make it 3 and 3. Pop him in the net. Okay, I had 2 in 2 basically, and they both disgorged a job, so I went back out thinking I was being quite clever with a 30 centimetre hook length, no sign, nothing. To be fair, I thought the fish had just rocked up. Went back to a 50, nothing, and realistically I've not had another sign. I've just had we're at the hour mark now, so I've got 2 fish, which is, I did say that I'd be happy with that, but getting 2 in 2 as quick as that made me think they'd rocked up and it was going to be steady. I'm just having a chuck now, it's got like 30 seconds left on a little tiny window. The idea being with the window, I'm fishing a little 20 gram 3-hole cage. The window will just go a little bit further, they just fly straighter, just to see if there was a fish sitting off the back. But to be honest, I thought it would have gone by now, and I've had no indications either, so it's not like there's a few fish on the bait. So what I'm going to do, because we are just over the hour mark, I'm going to reel this in any second now, put it down and have a quick look on where I put all the bait. I'd like to have left it a little bit longer, but I sort of can't wait to see. That's the little window. Only holds a tiny little bit of bait, but it just flies really straight and it just straightens the braid a bit more, so it's probably going like ½ a metre further than a cage. So it just enables me to fish off the back of my bait without having to take the clip off. Put that on there, swap them over. Before I do move though, I just want to set it, if I can, set it up for when in case I need to go straight back on it, rather than just sort of leaving it and saying that's that. I don't know that there's going to be any fish on this short line, so I've just put a blob of worm and a few pinkies. You can see the worms just squeezing out there in the big bait feed. I'm just going to put one in, just so there is a bit of bait there, should a few fish and say I need to go back to it. I think one of the mistakes a lot of anglers make when they switch lines, they don't set it up again. You know, all I'm doing now is just covering my bases so that if I do drop short, and because to me the short line is going to be feast or famine, I don't really want to be sitting on it for like 2 bites an hour, but I'm going to have sort of 15-20 minutes on it. But I've put some bait back on the original line, so if I do need to go back, fingers crossed, I've got it set up so I can catch a couple of quick fish off it. So it's just a case of, until I can get that short line going, keep alternating the 2 lines. And by keeping a bit of bait going in on that long line, I've always got the option. Might even be, I'll get a run on the short line and then have to go back to the long line. But because I've kept baiting it, there's always a chance of a bite out there. Whereas if you haven't baited it for 3 hours, suddenly realise you have to go back to it, then your chances of catching there are pretty slim. You know, I've tried double dead maggot on the hook. I'm just going to stick with the 3 pinkies because that's what I caught the fish on. I'm not going to put any worms in first chuck. I'm just going to put 5 or 6 pinkies just to see, because I've only had 2 fish, and like, I was going to have 1 chuck just to see what's there. Chucking 15 metres is just like really difficult, just to get it to nice London soft. There we go. Just interested to see whether any fish are over that bait. You know, my idea is, obviously I've put all that bait there, but there's not a lot in it. So in an ideal world, I maybe won't catch one this chuck to start. Just reset the watch. Sorry, duck's just tangled in the line. But what I will do, I'll start putting a bit of bait in at the back, so there'll be quite a lot of, like every time I chuck in, it's quite rich, as in what's in the feeder. So I'll be able to concentrate the fish just at the back of the food. But first of all, I just want to see if any fish have actually come to that initial feed. And if I don't get a bite this chuck, literally going to give it, I'll give it 5 minutes just because of how cold it is. But then I should start putting a bit of worm in and trying to, oh, so the liner then. Little tiny liner. Like I said, I'm on mono this time, so, but it shows there was a fish. There obviously is a fish over that bait. I just didn't want to put worm in, because although I've caught 2 fish, didn't feel as though it was building on that long line. Another indication then, little indication. So it might be that worms, it's just so cold that they don't want the worm. It's always just a tough one. I'm just reluctant to risk killing the swim. If I keep getting a few signs, I will drop to that 30 centimetre again. I've had 2 little tiny liners, but no proper bite. But the liners are always a good sign, particularly like when I'm fishing just over the back of my feed, because it says there's a few fish milling about on that bait. So I'll keep you updated. I thought this might go straight away, but doesn't look like it will. I say if it doesn't go, oh, is that going to go? No, another indication though. Definitely some fish on this short line. I'll have this chuck, and then if it doesn't go, I'll put a bit of worm through. Have 1 chuck with a worm, just try and feel my way in that way. At least I know there's fish there. So once you've got fish feeding in the swim, I'll let them sort of tell me what I want. Like I say, in my head, I think they want worms, but I just want to let them, oh, there we go. Maybe they don't want worms. That's first chuck on the short line. It's been out 2 minutes. And I've had probably like 4 indications before that as well. So, which is exactly what I was looking for, really. Like I said, I was going to put some worms in, but now this has come along, I should just put pinch of pinkies in again and keep on with it. Because if I'm catching, there's no need to change anything. It's hard to tell on mono if it's any bigger or not. Similar sort of size. There we go. But the perfect sort of response as in getting a fish first cast. Even the ducks approve. That one's only lip hooked, so drop him in the net. Probably just over the pounder mark. So I've got like, what, probably 3 for £4, which hour and 20 minutes into the match, wouldn't be unhappy with that because I'll be thinking the best times are ahead of me. Back to the 3 red pinkies. So I was going to put the worms through, but with that bite and the indications, it says there's already fish there. So just keep a bunch of pinkies in. Drop it back out. Drop down on the long line. I was using a 20 gram. Because I'm only chucking so short now, I've just got a little 10 gram 3-hole on. The reason being I don't need the weight. I mean, I'm not casting very far. And a 10 gram goes in a lot quieter. There's literally no ripple. So I don't want to be crashing a heavy feeder on top of them. And I'm fishing it nice and slack as well. So I don't need to just don't need the weight basically. So 10 gram goes in a lot quieter. So it's back, reset the clock again. Just see if I get any more signs other than this swan that keeps pecking my rod rest. Like I say, I think if there was a wind on that had helped, and a bit of tow, but it doesn't get any sort of calmer than what it is at the minute. So anyway, I'll keep you updated. It's not gone straight round and no immediate signs, but I'd like to think now, in the next sort of half an hour, I'll get 3 or 4 fish. So like maybe, oh, there's another one. And it's just the sort of response I wanted really. Like I've got the 2 lines, the positive and the negative. And by allowing that negative to settle, it looks like there's a lot of fish on it. And like I say, just makes me wonder whether on that long line, worms were right. Maybe I didn't need to feed them. But that's the beauty of having 2 lines and experimenting with the different baits. I mean, sometimes it might just be that worms are good as an impact. So I might have to put some in later, but at the minute, that bite was under a minute, so it might be a little bit bigger, this one. Tiny bit. But it shows you how quick, when they come, you can start to catch. It's probably £1.75 pounds. Nicely hooked in the bottom lip. Again, still not big by Larford, but we're starting to tick along, which is what it's all about. And I've got that long line nicely set up, ready for a bite if I need to go back to it. But what I'd expect is a real quick run now, so maybe 4 or 5 fish in half an hour, then it'll probably die. I might need to put a couple in, top it up, rest it for half an hour, and then just come back to it. Which is why it's handy to have the 2 lines to rotate, especially if I can start to nick fish off both lines. So there we go. Like I said, I'll keep you updated, and hopefully in the next, probably when we come back in sort of 20 minutes, I'll have had 3 or 4 more. As I sort of expected, I've had five fish in 25 minutes. I've had 2 decent ones as well, like 2.5 pounds. One little, oh, thought that was going to go then. Oh, it is going to go. That's 6 in like basically 26 minutes. Loads of indications when I first dropped on this short line. And then it probably had 3 in like, I don't know, 6-7 minutes, and then it's just quietened off. And I've waited a little bit longer and I've had 2 better ones. But no, not many indications now. Still not fed a worm there. In my head I want to, but it seems madness to put a few worms in when there's still fish to be caught. I'm just basing it pretty much on the fact last time I come in they did like worms. But like I said, indications have sort of died down, but still getting bites, so a bit of a mixture of sizes. That's a small one again. But I bet I've got, don't know what, I've had 6, 8 fish now for probably like 12, 14 pound, and we're only, what are we, sort of 1 hour and 40 in. And I'd still expect the best part of the days in front of me. And considering how cold it is, what I might think of doing, if I'm going to stay on this line a bit longer, I'll just put another one in on the long line, just to keep it topped up really. Like so, I don't envisage this line can last. Oh, a bit of slime on the, I always like to remove any slime on the hook length. Yeah, I might I just need to keep that long line top right up, because this line is getting slower, and that is what I'd expect, but there's still more than enough bites to keep me on it. The question will be, when I have to go back long, whether I top this line back up again. Experience says probably not. I mean, it's not normally, when I've caught like this in the past, you don't get another whammy at it if you just fill it in again. You only really get one chance to fill it in, and that's at the start. So my thinking will be, if this does go quiet and I want to go back long, I'll just leave it and go. And then if I drop back and don't get a response again, then maybe I'll look at putting a 2 or 3 more in just to see. But my idea is, the way this works is you have to put what you want to put in at the start. You don't really fill it in again. The only thing I've still got in my armoury, which might work, is of course worms. But like I said, while I've been getting bites, oh, is that another sign then? It's almost like they're starting to come back again now. I'm reluctant to put them in, purely for the reason, if you catch in, why change anything? Maybe I could catch quicker, maybe I could catch bigger fish, but it's still quite risky this early on. And it gives me a chance to keep the worms in reserve, so that later on, if I try and need to make something happen, I could maybe put some worms in just to see. So I'm going to keep feeling my way in, but like, what have I got? 8 fish, hour and 40, hour and 45 in. I mean, I can't complain at that. It's just a question now. The next half an hour is probably massive. It'll probably, if I keep catching on this short line, oh, another sign, it's going to make the day really easy. And if I don't, then I'm going to have to think about alternating the 2 lines to try and keep bites coming. So we'll see how it goes. Okay, looks like I'm going to have to switch lines. I think I've had 7 or 8 on the short line now, but we've been going 2 hours and there's no indications. And I feel like if I stay there too long, I'm going to kill it altogether. I mean, it went dead for like 10 minutes. Just slopped up my ground bait like so. So it's almost like a putty, but it's clouding. Just a few pinkies in it, just like that. Chucked it out and had one instantly. I thought, oh, they want a bit of cloud, but I've not managed another one. And that's how that, when you slop it up, all I do is just use my atomizer, over wet a bit in the corner of the bowl. Just try it for a couple of chucks to put some cloud back in the water. Like I say, it got me a 2 pound plus fish instantly, but nothing since. And like, there's no indications now. So I think half an hour rest on this line, which is pretty much, depends whether I can catch on the long line. If I can nick a couple of fish in the next half an hour on the long line, oh, just had a little indication then, but it's not like it was. And then come back on this line and really attack it for the sort of second half of the match or the last 2 hours. I mean, I think I will try putting a few worms in then. If I don't drop back on and it's solid, I'm going to put some worms through, because I feel like as an impact bait they might work. But I don't want to just keep flogging a dead swim, so to speak. So I think I'm not going to top it up. Like I said, I think you've got to put your bait in at the start on that line, which is what I've done. That's my feeder. Back to the little 20 gram. So I'm just going to rely on the fact there's still some bait there. Rest it for 20 minutes, half hour, depending on what happens when I chuck this back out. And then see where we are. Ideally, I'll be surprised if I don't nick a quick one on this, but never quite know, because I did put one in and I've not been off it for a long time. So stick with the 3 pinkies. Not going to put any worms back on first chuck, just to see if there's one there. Back out to sort of the 25 metre line. I feel like I've set it up, so I should be rewarded with a quick fish. And like a little half hour rest on that short line. When I go back on it, I'll go back on it with no worms again. And if that doesn't work, just start putting a bit of worm through and see if I can make something happen. But let's see if I can nick a quick fish on this first. I've gone back on the long line. I'd first chuck with no worms, not even a sign, which sort of said there wasn't anything there, or I certainly hadn't pulled anything. So what I've just done, I've had basically 3 instant chucks. So I've chucked 3 times with as much worm as I can get in that little 3-hole feeder as possible. Then on the 4th chuck, I've just left it in. It's been in 6 minutes. I've only got a 30 centimetre hook length on as well to try and get the hook bait a bit closer to the feeder. And it's gone round and I've got a fish on, which sort of says they've come to that worm pretty quick. Another sort of 2 pounder, but it's given me a bit of confidence that when I go on that short line, depending on what happens, I can probably put a bit of worm in, especially if this long line starts to get stronger. Now I'm really ploughing it in. say a couple of pound. But that's straight off. Literally had 3 chucks where I've let the feeder hit bottom. I'll show you how much sort of worm I've been putting in. Still fishing pinky on the hook. I would try, if I was getting loads of signs and no bites, then I'd look to try a worm on the hook, but I'm quite happy to keep with the pinkies at the minute. It's literally getting loads of worm, nothing else. If I just plug the feeder, then I'll show you. There's a few pinkies crept into the bowl. Basically, it's just like a little ball of worm slop. So loads more worm than I've been putting in before. Short 30cm hook length. But I just wanted to see how quick, well, A, how quick, and if the fish came to worms at all before I risked putting them in on that short line. And the fact I had 3 instant chucks, I waited a bit for that fish. But after 3 chucks like that, then probably I'd expect 2. Set the watch again. So my plan is, well, depending on what happens on the next 2 chucks, probably fish sort of 6-minute chucks if I can, and just keep ploughing the worm in, just see what happens. Just that way I can work out what to do when I go back on that short line. Because at the minute, like up until I just had that fish, I felt like the short line was the only place I could catch anything. So it was almost like, by ploughing the worms in on the long line, I'm not risking anything because there was nothing happening anyway. So rather than just sort of sit there going through the motions, catching nothing, it just made sense. 3 quick instant chucks. It's not a lot of bait, it's only a 3-hole cage, but just try and spark a response with worms. And if I didn't get one, then it's pretty safe to assume, look, they're not really eating worms. But I hadn't killed a swim because there was nothing to kill in the first place. And the fact that I've had 1 fish could be coincidence, it might have just come into the cloud. But if I can start to get a few signs, and maybe nick a few fish on that long line, then it says to me, yeah, they're eating worms. So when I come on the short line, I can start putting a few through, knowing that I'm not going to harm the only good line I've got. Because there were still fish on that short line when I come off it. Admittedly, it wasn't solid, but I thought I had a sign then, but it might have just been as I was tightening up. But it wasn't devoid either. Like I said, the only disappointment really has been this longer line. I felt like when I rested it, put one in, felt as though there should have been fish on it. But we've just had 1, so if I persevere with it for the next 20 minutes, I can maybe put a couple more in the net, and then when I drop short again, I'll have another little burst. We'll see what happens. As I said, I ploughed worms in. I think I had 3, might have even been 4 really quick fish, but I don't know, it's just gone again. I'm getting an odd indication, so there is fish there, but I can't get a proper bite. I'm still on the 30cm hook length, but I had 3 or 4 really quick fish, like decent stamp. Thought, right, they really want the worms, but now it's completely gone 15 minutes again now. Probably 4 fish in 15 minutes, and now 15 minutes without a bite, so I'm not going to put another one in because I feel there is fish there. Actually, I'm going to put another one in, just for the reason, just to see. So I'm going to put a big blob of worm in the middle of it, put 1 more in, and then drop back on that short line. Just weird how that long line, like, I've had 2 bursts of fish on that long line. I felt like when I got them ones just now, when I was ploughing worms, that's it now, sorted it. It's just going to get better. But it fizzled out as quickly as they come. It's just like they won't settle at all. Not quite sure why. But there is still an odd indication out there. So there is fish there, just can't get a bite. So I'm going to put a big feeder in, seal the worms oozing out the side, and then drop on this drop back on the short line. What I'm going to do, go back in on the short line, work out the opposite corner, just where that's just dried up a little bit. Just with a few pinkies in, see what happens. If no bite, my idea now is hopefully catch a few without feeding any worms on this short line, and then as soon as it starts to die, start putting a few worms in. wrong rod, because I'm sure they are eating worms. Not saying they're going mad for them, but they're certainly not killing the swim either. So it seems like when they're there, 3 pinkies is as good as anything. When I can't catch a fish, it doesn't seem to matter what I've got on the hook. I can swap and change. So right, just a blob of 6 or 8 pinkies. Back on that short line. If it's going to plan, I should get, I'd like to think, I'll get one on this line within 2 to 3 minutes. If I don't, then it makes my mind up to just start feeding a load of worms on this short line and try and sort of really push it going into sort of the last hour and a half, 2 hours. Because I feel like I could just do with a, if I was going to catch like sort of a big match winning weight, yeah, it's cold. I've got a lot of room today to pull fish from. I should be able to set it up for like a 7, 8, 9, even a 10 fish burst. That one sort of hour which really, basically where you put a load of weight in the net. At the minute I seem to be able to catch, and I did have 7 or 8 off this line when I first went on here, but it took a bit of time. And I think I've had 5 off the long line now, 6 off the long line. But I just like that mad sort of 40, 45 minute spell where you think, right, I'm in a winning position. No immediate sign, which is a little bit concerned. Oh, there's a liner, just as I said it. Just a little indication. So there's fish there again. Like I said, I haven't fed a lot. Just put all that bait in to start. When it went really calm, there's a little tiny ripple on now. Oh, another liner. I could see an odd bubble. So I knew there were fish over the top of the bait. But there's a little ripple on now and I can't see anything. Although if it was fizzing properly, I'd be able to see. And on that long line, there's been an odd bubble coming up when it's flat calm. Not loads, but enough to let me know there is fish out there. I just would have expected, I think I've had 3 signs this chuck. I'm surprised it's not been dragged in. If it doesn't go this chuck, what are we on, 1 minute 42, and I've had 3 signs. I'm surprised it's not gone, but what I'm thinking is, there's not a lot of bait out there, so they could be milling around. So if I start another line, what was it going to go? Another liner then. If I put some worms in and a bit more pinky, try and concentrate on where I'm fishing. At the minute they're probably grazing over a big area. So by starting to put a bit more bait through the feeder at the right time of day, because I feel now I'm at the time of day where we should be starting to kick on, I should be able to get a quick flurry of bites. The pleasing thing is, oh, another sign. I've dropped back on it then, and there's fish there. Oh, is that? That's on. It's a little fish, a small fish though, very small. In fact, probably about 2 ounce by the oh, smallest one of the day. Not the best sign, but that certainly wasn't the cause of all the line bites. There you go. Smallest of the day, but a fish all the same. What I'm going to do now is start to put some worms in. I think there is fish there. They're grazing over that bait that I've put in at the start. So to get them to tighten up and get them round where my feeder is, I'm going to start putting some worms in. Start attacking it a little bit more. Like I say, I've had a nice steady start, but now I just need to kick on. Okay. And I think worms are going to be a few more pinkies, little blob of worms. What I always like to do while I'm waiting for a bite is set the bowl up, as in, so I'm just tightening on, as in get it ready. So like there's a blob of worms now and a few pinkies, so when I come, hopefully this will go round. Don't forget to start the watch. And when it does, be a case of unhooking the fish, dropping it in the net, baiting the hook, and then just the bowl's ready. So it's not like I've got to pick up a blob of worms, pick up a blob of pinkies, drop them all in and then go out. I can literally just scoop through the bowl where I've already set it up. That's one of the reasons I like to work out of one corner. And also it allows me to change it a bit. Say I decide I don't want any worms in 20 minutes time, which could happen. I can just pick everything up, throw it out, scrape some fresh ground bait into that corner and just start again. That's one of the reasons I don't like mixing loads of bait into my ground bait, because it doesn't give me the ability to change anything. Whereas if I work in one corner with a little bit of bait, I can just keep working in that corner and I can just change things a lot quicker. It's something that I just find works for me and allows me to vary things. Whereas if you just put the same amount of bait into a bowl, you're not changing anything, you're just doing the same thing. And if you suddenly find it's wrong, it's very difficult to get that bait out of the bowl. Surprised, like I said, I just put a load of worms in, and I know it was only a tiny fish last chuck, but it was a fish, and I had quite a few indications before it. Gone back in and like no sign now. I know it's only been out a minute 20, but I'm surprised there's no sign. Even if it hadn't gone with a bite, I'd have thought I'd have had a line bite. It just seems today, for some reason, the fish aren't settling that well, which is one of the reasons why I think you definitely need 2 lines. Even if it's just a resting line and a fish catching line. Just need 2 lines so you've got somewhere. Oh. There we go. Another little fish. It's like very small fish. Could be the fact. Basically, I'm just sort of going to try swinging it. Yes, get up there. Could just be the fact there's not a lot of bait there now to hold them bigger fish. Maybe I could have put more in initially, but I'm going to keep on with the worms because I feel like I need to do something now to kick this line on. And it hasn't killed that long line. I'm not saying it's sent it mad either, but it definitely hasn't sort of killed it. Nice little plop as it went in. I always like to just feel it down to the bottom with the rod in front of the rod rest and then just pull it back. Just means you haven't got quite as much slack to take up then, particularly if you're getting quick bites. We could say it's not quite going to plan. Basically, I dropped back on this short line. I had 2 little ones straight away that you saw. Then next chuck I had 1 2-pound, and then it's basically not moved since. Well, it has moved. I've had an odd little indication. I've just put a 30cm hook length on, try and get a bit closer, get the bait closer to the feeder, but nothing. And actually not had a sign on this chuck with it short. It's almost like you've got a maximum like 3 or 4 fish on the line and then that's it. You can't just keep chucking down the same spot. What I'm going to try, just before I go back to that long line, I'm going to chuck in a second. Oh, is that an indication then? Like there's a few small fish there now, but not actually any. I'm going to wet that ground bait up a little bit more. I'm going to chuck and just stop it a bit further back. So I'm actually dropping on the bait that I put in at the start. Because bear in mind I'm fishing a metre past. And now I'm not getting loads of signs, but I don't know, it's worth a quick drop. Rather than take a metre off and re-clip, all I'm going to do is just stop it a bit further back in the cast and just see whether there's any fish actually on the bait. But I'm not going to put anything in bait-wise, so I'm just going to plug it with neat ground bait. So all I'm going to do, instead of going like right forward, stop it sort of there, so I can feed it down. So it's on that. In theory, it's pretty much on the initial feed, if there's much of it left, which I'm sure there is some. I'm going to give it 3 minutes, and then I don't know. It's a toughie. Because I really expected a good run of fish now on this line, but it's not happened. Like I say, it's difficult to work out. The fish just don't seem to be staying long enough to say, oh yeah, they're really feeding well on worms, or do they just want a cloud? It's just really odd. I don't think it's a coincidence that when I go on this short line, first couple of chucks, there's always fish there, and then they back off really quick. Oh, that's indication then. Like I say, almost as though they don't really want much bait at all. don't think the initial bait was wrong. What I'm saying is I don't think they want, maybe they're just not bothered about what's going through the feeder. Maybe a cloud is more important than anything else, is into trying to catch them. I think that's going to be my next step. Maybe go back long. Just try plugging it with basically neat ground, sort of wet the ground bait up a little bit with the atomizer so it's quite sloppy and creating a bit of a cloud. Maybe have sort of 4 or 5, sort of 2 to 3 minute chucks. Just cloud it up and see if that does anything. So I don't really know what's gone on with this short line. It was brilliant when I first went on it. The only thing I can think is I could have put more on it at the start now. Not as in more, as in loads more loose offerings, but maybe instead of 10, I could have put 15 in. Would that have held them for any longer? I don't know, it's a difficult one to say. It might just be the nature of the fact. Barston's very much like this at the minute. 2 or 3 quick fish and you think you're away, and then it just dies off, gone. And it doesn't just like slow down, it's like really quick fish, nothing, and just don't seem to settle. I don't know if it's because the water's a little bit clearer or the water temperature's just ridiculously low, because although it's quite a nice day today, as I've said before, it had ice on it last week, and I don't think the water temperature can get any lower. So maybe I should just be happy with what I'm actually catching. But having had that brilliant spell on the short line on the sort of hour and a quarter mark, I can't help but think now there's a way of catching more fish than what, as a liner, there's a way of catching more fish than what I'm catching. And like I say, I am getting indications, I'm just not getting bites. So I think next step is back to that long line, 20 minutes, half hour on that, see what happens. And then the last hour, I'm going to make it happen on the short line. That's the plan anyway, so we'll go from there. Well, first chuck back long, just plugged it with neat ground bait, took everything out. It's only been out 2 minutes and it's gone round. I'm just going to have half an hour now, just plugging it with wet, neat ground bait. Short hook length, 30 centimetres. Just keep on with a bunch of pinkies, because when the fish have been there, I seem to have caught on them. Slightly better fish. But this is the first time I've actually gone alternated lines, and other than on the short line, gone back to that long line and got a fish. Probably the biggest, not got much of a tail, probably the biggest fish I've had today. More like the stamp I was sort of hoping to catch. That one's probably Stumpy, you call him, with his tail, but he's got to be 2.5 pound plus. He's a chunky old fish. I'm hoping now that maybe I'm onto something, well, with the neat ground bait, and I don't need to be ploughing worms in or feeding loads of pinkies. Just need to be nice and steady. I think maybe cloud's more important, which is one of the reasons Liam's so good in the mix. The other thing, by feeding just ground bait, I'm not giving, so I just wet that up a little bit more, the fish a lot of choice other than the hook bait. If they want to sort of eat, all right, they can feed on the ground bait, but the hook bait's the main sort of solid item they've got to eat. Be nice to get a run of them size fish just to finish on, or just for the last sort of hour and a half. Interesting, I didn't have any indications before that. So it might be with less bait in the feeder, I'll get less indications and maybe more proper bites. Be nice to get some quick bites, like sort of inside a minute. But like I say, I'm just going to plug away. There's a bit of worm still in that. To start that corner fresh, just use the atomizer just to tweak the mix. So as you can see, if I just get it nice and wet, it's just sort of, it's not a slop like I showed you earlier, but it's a lot wetter than what I'd normally have it. Normally I'd use like the worm juice or a bit of moisture on the pinkies just to wet it up. This time I'm just relying obviously on the atomizer, just putting a bit of cloud in the water. No real food, lots of cloud. Just see if I can, by keeping up the 3 minute chucks, maybe I can just pull a few fish and get that little run I feel I need to make what's a decent day into a really good one. but it's not gone straight, which I was hoping. The funny thing is, when I've had a lot of indications, it don't seem to have caught, so let's see. Maybe like no food, short hook length. When I get a bite, it'll be a proper bite, decent. Oh, there we go. There's another one. That's a decent fish as well. Oh, decent, couple of pound, definitely. Just literally wet ground bait. Might be a case of as well, you just got to keep changing things up, which, because like when I had a few quick chucks on worm, I caught just putting dry and pinkies in. And now I'm getting a run on just cloud. But I will say, if you do want to create cloud, then cloud and a low food content, there's nothing better than adding a bit of lean to the mix, because that's exactly what it does. Feels like another £2 pluser. 10 of these to finish and I'll be happy. Probably won't get another bite now. Short hook length seems alright as well, to be fair. Doesn't seem, certainly not putting them off. Good thing about short hook length is where you get a more positive bite, and I've not had any problems then with them swallowing it, like I did them first two. That's another nice one. These are the ones I've been looking for. So I'm just trying to drop the feeder into the net. £2 plus. 3 pinkies again, nicely hooked in the scissors. It's probably just over £2. 9 to go, and I'll be an happy man. Apart from I've just hooked my landing net. There we go, I'm gonna get back out and I'll update you, hopefully in about 15 minutes when I've got another 3 or 4 in the net. Sometimes things don't quite go according to plan. So last time you saw me, I had 2 good fish, 2 casts, and was 9 more, and I was going to be happy. Well, 15 minutes went by, I never had another sign. Kept chucking every 3 minutes, just with neat ground bait, wet it up, clouded it up, not a sign. So I just put a big feeder out there again with a big guru, filled it full of worms, and just put that in nice and wet. Then I dropped it back short, just chucked it with neat ground bait, never moved. So I just put a big blob of worms in the feeder, probably as much worms as ground bait, chucked it back out, and within a minute and a half, sort of £1.75, £2 fish. Just seems like it's a day. The water temperature is obviously still really low. I've just got to keep alternating the 2 lines, because I'm not going to get a massive run, it doesn't seem now, on any one line. I still think the short line would be the best option for getting a run, but it just hasn't happened. But by fishing the 2 lines, I'm still catching quite steady. I'm still going to finish with £30 plus, which is a good day silverfish fishing when the water temperature is this low. But it's a question of been sort of feeling my way in a lot without ever getting that sort of hour where you just think, well, I'm going to catch 60, £70. Interestingly, very few signs now. I'll just plug this with worm again. It seems like maybe 2, 3 fish off a line, then that's it. Doesn't matter what I do. Chuck a little window so it goes past it. Long hook length, short hook length, double dead maggot. Nothing. Move lines again. Or maybe just do something slightly different on a new line. And you get a little quick response, 2, 3 fish. And then gone. I mean, the one thing I think is like, you can't just, they're just spooking away from constantly casting in the same spot. I mean, so what I might do is try and be a bit rougher with the casting, does that make sense? As in, maybe in the next chuck, I'll just go a metre to the left. Just so I'm not casting continually to the same spot and possibly spooking the fish away from it. Like I say, there's no line bites or anything now. That last bite was completely, I haven't started to watch. That last bite was completely out of the blue. I haven't really had any mileage either in sort of leaving it out. Most of my bites have been well inside 5 minutes when the fish are there. I've tried leaving it like up to 10 a couple of times, and it's like when they're gone, they are gone. Doesn't matter how long you leave it, they're not coming back. The only thing that has sort of worked, I'd say to a degree, on that long line is coming off it, putting a big one in, and then when you go back, you just always seem to be guarantee you a couple of quick fish. It doesn't guarantee you a run of fish. And that's what the short line was, I was hoping, which it did at first. I said the only thing I'd perhaps have done different, that I can think of at the minute, is I'd have put more in on that short line, because it was such a good response when I first went on it. And I may be wondering now whether there's just, it's too late in the session now for me, in my head, I'm not going to put another 5 in. That sort of boat sailed. But I think if I went back, I'd maybe put 15 in. Because I'm not fishing on top of it, but maybe would have held them for a little bit longer. I don't know, it might have made no difference, but that's the one thing I'm thinking in my head. As for what to put through the feeder, it's been one of them days hard to work it out because I can't line any fish up. Worms haven't been bad. Nothing's been bad, but nothing's been amazing. Like I said, that bite then just put a few worms in the feeder straight out the blue. But this has been out, considering I didn't start the watch straight away, close to 2 minutes and not a sign again. What I'm going to try is just to chuck to the left. Just don't go around inside 5, chuck to the left. Then if that doesn't go, I'll back to that long line and see if they've come back onto when I put a feeder in, which I'll bet money they have. Almost makes you think I could come off this, put one big one in, go back long for 20 minutes, catch 2 or 3, come back short, maybe catch 2 or 3, and that would be the better way to do it rather than trying to get a big hit short and nick fish long. But like I said, we're coming into last hour now, so I might get a run, but I'm not getting the indications I was. When I first dropped in on this line, there was loads of indications. But now, like I say, although I had that fish last drop, just gone back in and it's been out 3 minutes now and it's not moved. Which is fine if it pulls around in a minute out of the blue, but I don't know, I'm not feeling there's a lot of fish on this line at all. So I think what I'm going to do, one chuck to the left, and just to try and maybe to prove something to myself, I'm going to put one big one in on this short line, then go long, hopefully nick 2 fish, and then when I come back, maybe try and nick 2 off the short line, and then we'll pretty much be at the end of the day, but it'll maybe give me 4 or 5 nice fish just to finish on. So I'll update in, if this doesn't go round, which doesn't look like it's going to, perhaps update in the next sort of 10-15 minutes when I've dropped it back long, just to see whether putting a feeder full of worms in on that long line and going back on it, whether it buys me a couple more fish. After I last spoke to you, I had 2 more fish short, sort of bored them on a little bit. I had one on the left-hand chuck and then one on the chuck when I was talking to you, but both like sort of 5.5 minute bites. So I put one in, loads of worm. When I say one, big baiting nut feeder, full of worm. And I've gone back long to nick my 2 and basically not had a single sign. So we've got about 20 minutes to go and that'll be a 5-hour session. So I'm going to reel this in because it's not literally moved. It's been weird on that long. I've had a couple of spells of like 2 fish, 3 fish, and then nothing. The only thing I can think is I was a long time between topping it up and going on it, but this also, when I drop short, if this swan doesn't bite my fingers, it should give me an idea if they're coming to the bait really quickly, perhaps, maybe quicker than I realised. But if they are, that doesn't explain why they've spooked so easily today. So I'm going to drop this. I'm going to put 4 pinkies on. Bigger bait, they might find it a bit quicker. Still on the 16. Little pinch of worms. Not mixing them into the ground bait, just blob them. I'd expect it's gone in nice. If what I'm sort of thinking holds true, I'd expect a few signs straight away, because like, I've just put one big feeder in. I definitely think the short line's the better line. Them bream and skimmers, they don't want to be very far out at all. So like I say, I haven't put anything in there really other than that little 3-hole when I'm fishing here since the start. So I've put one big feed. I put loads of worm in it just to see. It's that time of day now where I'm almost trying to force it. I just like a couple of fish in the last 20 minutes just to finish on. And I've expected, that's the baffle, like to drop on a line and catch instantly. Probably what, it's, I don't know, 12, 14 minutes since I put that one big feeder on here. And I find it hard to believe in that space of time fish have been in and cleared it out. It just seems more of a case of it's been a day for just keeping busy, trying things and just chopping and changing the two lines. It seems like when the line's dead, there's no point sitting on it because you're not going to reinvent it. Better to switch lines and rest it and then go back to it. But I really expected to drop on this now. Just had a liner then, an indication. I've had a few indications to be fair, but I'd expect to because I'm fishing so close. And I put a bit of bait in. And to be fair, I'm saying it hasn't been hard, it just hasn't really kicked off. But like I say, I've had a little liner then. It's just not getting them quick bites where you think the swim's solid now. But hopefully if I can finish with, if in this last, 17 minutes now, I can catch 2, maybe 3 more, then that'll be a nice way to end the session. So fingers crossed. Feeder wise, with it being so cold, and with my choice, it's all about basically small. I'm only fishing short range. I don't want to be crashing a Coke can in on top of the fish all the time. So for baiting up, I've used the Guru baiting up feeder, 20 gram. Could have took the lead off to be fair, I've chucked so close, but with it being sort of 8 to 10 foot deep, I've left it on just to try and get the feeder down that bit quicker. That's been for baiting up. Then when it comes to fishing, have I got them all? See if I can find it, yeah. Basically I've alternated between these 3, which are basically the 3-hole, the narrowest design. They're from a company called FEEDER. Narrowest design they do a wide, if I've got a wide here so I can show you them both, and a narrow version. I've used the narrower one today purely because it is cold and I don't want to put lots of bait in, but if it was a bit warmer, I might opt for the wider version just to get that bit more bait down. So little 3-hole feeder. On the short line, where is it? I've used 10 gram, purely for the fact I don't need a lot of weight. I'm only fishing close in. Feeder doesn't have to go down that quick. And I just think 10 gram creates less disturbance. On the long line, I've just used 20 gram. So not silly heavy, but 20 gram just makes casting accuracy a bit better. Just makes everything a little bit easier. So they're the feeders I've used. Small is the theme. And then just for going past every now and again, but it's not worked today, but it's a trick I like to use a lot. Just used a little tiny window feeder. Just plugged it with ground bait and a bit of worms. And like I said, it hasn't worked today, but it's one I'll always have with me and I'll always try. So that's feeder choice. There we go. First chuck back on the short line over the top of that one. And we've found a fish straight away. I did have that indication just before it, so it has been out a little bit of time, but short line's definitely been the better one. I don't know if it's because of the volume of bait or where the fish want to be. Another nice fish. Probably £1.75. Like I say, it's got to that stage now, it just seems more about being a little bit more patient. Bait's on the bottom, there's a few fish milling about, and just waiting for one to find it. And if you wait sort of like around that 5-6 minute mark now, on the short line anyway, there is a fish or two to be caught. Like I say, the long line's been a bit different, but the long line has served its purpose, I'd say. It's not like I've caught nothing of it. I've probably had 7 or 8 fish. It's just never kicked into life. Whereas every time I've come back to the short line, it's been pretty reliable for bites. That bite came slightly to the left, so I'm going to go to the left again. That's the only thing I'd perhaps do a little bit different if I came back. I'd cast around, I'd stay clipped up at 15 metres, but I'd cast around a little bit more. Like I said at the start, I did feed quite an area, and I feel my idea was to try and concentrate the fish just past it and pick them off. But in hindsight, I think I'd be a bit rougher and maybe like every now and again drop it a metre and a half to the left, and then maybe drop it a metre and a half to the right. Just spread it about a bit because they're definitely not wanting to settle. And I think if I'd have cast it about a little on the same distance, but by alternating left or right over the bed of bait, I think I maybe could have picked a couple more fish off. But it's only what I think, and it's only something that just become apparent as the session progresses. You know, when you don't know a venue, this is not a venue that I've fished a lot on the feeder for silvers. You're learning as you go along, but I do feel like I have learnt today, and I do think if I'd had alternated left and right a little bit more, it would have been worth a couple more fish. And it maybe might have kept him in the peg a bit longer because it wouldn't have been so easy for him to spook. But like I say, every day's a school day. And, oh, did that move? If I could just pick up one more nice 2.5 pounder, it'd be a fitting end to what's been, oh, and I've missed it. Little fish, I think. It's my excuse anyway, but definitely seems to have worked. To be fair, it might have been a liner, but it wasn't sort of a double movement. It does seem to have worked. Putting that one feeder in, as in just reignited the swim a bit. Like I said, I'm fishing slightly left of where I've been casting now. Like I said, I think maybe when it died, I could have gone like a metre to the right and then just seen. Because it's still quite a small area, and even the skimmers aren't massive, but they're good stamp, and they need a bit of room to feed on. So, see if we can get that last one, and then we'll have a bit of a summary. Last fish of the day. I missed that bite when I was talking to you, gone back out, and on 4.5 minutes, it's gone again. There is an odd fish there now, but they're certainly not going mad. Pound fish to finish on. It's just been one of them days when I think they haven't wanted to settle. You know, I don't think my approach has been far wrong. Oh, it was hardly hooked at all. I can just hold him up. Yeah, probably the pound. I don't think my approach has been far wrong. I just think maybe needed to rotate a little bit better, and I think every time I maybe come off the short line, I could have put one more in. I think that's been the secret to the day. What I've learned, I feel, is every time you come off a line, rather than saying, right, forget about that line, put one in, set it up again, so when you do get back on it, you've got a good chance of a fish. And I think that sort of last half an hour, when I set the short line back up for the first time, I've had 3 fish off it, just shows that it could be done. And I think the short line's your banker, that's where the fish want to be, and that 25 metre line, great little backup. I've probably had, 25, 30 fish at least, and I've probably had 8 to 10 off the long line, so it's not been a waste of time. It's allowed me to tick over, and I think leaving that short line for the first hour, that's vital, at least an hour. Almost the longer you can leave that short line, the better that first run's going to be. So even if you're not catching on your 25 metre line, don't get tempted onto that short line too early. So I'm going to get packed up, and then we'll have a look at what I've caught. So there you go, probably 35 pound plus of Larford skimmers. Not bad on a cold day in February. Plenty of bites, which is what it's all about. So hope you've enjoyed it, and I'll see you next month on FEEDER.